Okay, Mike, so now 40 years.
Yeah, it's a long time.
So resilience and agility, how has that definition changed over those 40 years?
I think they've kind of come together. A resilient supply chain is something that now can adjust quickly to a disruption of things that happen more often than they used to. We used to separate agility more of how to quickly, go from one product to the next, but that's also a trait in being a resilient supply chain also.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you think it's more important than ever for supply chain organizations or supply chain leaders to be as resilient and agile?
Yeah, I think we're going to get measured on how resilient we are. If you go back, everything was measured to be 0 or 100. How do I become perfect, right? Perfect in today's world doesn't exist, but resilience does. And the companies that are more resilient, that could respond to some of the disruptions we were just talking about quickly, they're the ones that are going to be successful.
Yeah, we've heard a lot of people talk about, perfect, and, you don't have to achieve perfect, right? It's just trying to get as close as we can. And now, historically, supply chains were managed primarily, I think it's fair to say, for efficiency and to drive costs. How do you see that evolving? How have you seen it evolve, but how do you also see it evolving in future?
Yeah, I think it's quickly evolving. One could argue that some of the disruptions we've had was because we were managing supply chains for cost, didn't have redundancy built in, didn't have the resilience built in because there is somewhat of a cost. It's going to drive, I think, more partnerships. It's very difficult to have a resilient supply chain if you're bidding out somebody's business every year, right? So how do I, get a longer-term relationship that has stability built into it in terms of supply?
And sustainability, where does that fit in? In an agile and resilient supply chain, how important is sustainability as an essential item in there?
I think it's very important, and it can't be a separate item. What we do is embed sustainability. So every discussion, whether it's putting in a new motor in a factory or a new product, and the materials you're going to buy for that product, sustainability is part of how do I make that product more sustainable? How do I make that process more sustainable? It's the only way you're going to achieve the goals that we're setting out, which are, very, very aggressive.
And do you see sustainability as like a key business differentiator for a company like Colgate-Palmolive?
I think it'll be a differentiator for consumers. There's still a bit of a lag between, intent and action in terms of people want more sustainable products, but are they buying them? But that's going to quickly, I think, change also as people realize that, that's an important part of what you're buying.
And I don't want to keep banging on about the fact that you've been in the same job for 40 years, but there's just one more time.
I started when I was 10. So.
Obviously.
Yeah.
But obviously technology has transformed society and industries, and obviously, your role as well. And we just heard about, AI being used in the supply chain as well. So when it comes to emerging technologies, things like, automation and robotics, how do you think that will change the way that supply chains are built? And what impact, importantly, I suppose, will it have on the workforce as well?
Yeah, I think there's impacts in all of that. I do think it will affect the workforce. It will affect the competency of workers that you're going to need. It'll affect the locations of where you'll put sourcing locations in. It's that and data are probably some of the biggest changes. The way we were able to get and analyze data over those many years I've been there is the biggest change, and that's again moving very fast. But it will change decisions in terms of how we source products.
So how are you using data at the moment? Can you give us some examples, for instance, of how you're gathering and analyzing that data and then implementing it into your strategy?
Yeah, I think part of the challenge we're getting is how do you gather data, structure it so that you can use it properly, and then get analytics that are actionable. And then how do you then make the process able to take that and change without a lot of human intervention in between. And I think that's the key to, again, driving some efficiency within the supply chain using data.
And we're going to talk about you a bit more now. Okay. And your career again. Now, you must have faced some significant challenges over that career, and probably a lot of them have been in recent years as well. Can you maybe share a few examples of some of those key challenges and how you actually overcame them?
Yeah, I think a lot of the difference is the rate of change that has happened over those years. If we would implement something, a program, you would have years to implement it, years to perfect the outcome. Things are now happening, very quickly. Also, some things are maybe proven that they don't work in today's world. I mean, just-in-time was a big initiative. If you're in just-in-time inventory today, you might be just out of luck or out of stock. So you have to adjust how that is. How you manage inventory is still very important, but the world's changed. And so that whole thing about everything being perfect may not work in that. So you have to adjust for that.
So the world, like you said, the world's changed, and technology changes, the role changes. How does that impact your own personal leadership style? Would you say you've still got the same style, or is that something that needs to constantly evolve as well?
I think we communicate a lot more. We have ways to communicate more, and I think that's an important thing, especially in a world that is disrupted, constantly. People want to know where you're taking them, right? So our ability to communicate to many people often is now what really is important, I think, in terms of leading people. We have to keep them informed constantly, especially as things change as dramatically as they have.
Yeah, I completely agree. And are there any key things that you've learnt in your career that you think is relevant to pass on to like the next generation of supply chain leaders? I suppose it's the benefit of your experience and wisdom. This sounds like you're like retiring today, and I'm going to hand you the gold watch, right? Yeah. But if there's one thing that you would pass on that you think, this is absolutely relevant to the supply chain leaders of tomorrow, what would that be? Yeah,
I think you have to realize. I realize that how I learn things are not how we're going to do things in the future, right? But people and how to motivate people and how to lead people, that I think is still a competency that can be taught and passed on. People want to know where we're going, what we're going to do and why we're doing it, right? What is our purpose? Why are we doing this? And that hasn't changed. Now, how you motivate people have changed. Again, data and communication has changed a lot of that. People have changed. What's important to people, 40 years ago has changed in today's world. So I think the openness to understanding that you have to continually learn to lead people is the thing I would pass on.
And what's the last thing that you learned?
That I don't know a lot about what you just presented before in AI and things, but I know it's important, and I know that that's critical for our success going forward.
Well, I'll make sure I connect you with Harold later. We should definitely talk. Now, you've made it clear that stability is a thing of the past. We've had all these disruptions. It's certainly, we're still having these disruptions. Are they going to be a sort of a constant, do you think, this level of disruption? Because it just seems to be one after the other, and they're layering on top, and they're having this ripple effect. Yeah. Do you think it's here to stay?
I do, and it affects a lot of things. We were very good and helped us quite a bit in the beginning of the pandemic with contingency planning. But contingency planning, where one event happens one place in the world and you have backups. Now all of a sudden things happened everywhere, different things. How do you respond to that? That's where the resilience comes in. How do you now, with climate change, with weather events, with war, with all these events that are still happening and continue, it's not going to get back to where it was. So it's a new world that has to be managed, and understanding that you can't wait till it gets better. I think that's the biggest learning we've tried to tell people. It's not going back. How do we deal with this and be ready to deal with, and I don't know what the next event's going to be, but there will be one. How are we going to respond quickly to that?
So how has your strategy changed, if it has at all, over the last, let's say, since the beginning of the pandemic? How has how you manage or how you look at your own supply chain, how has that changed?
I think we're building in a little more redundancy than we had before. We're moving things closer to markets where we sold, maybe not necessarily, reshoring things, but getting them closer and having multiple options of how to do things. And I think it's also a constant evaluation of, is what we did last year relevant this year or next year? And I think that's part of the constant change that we're talking about, to continue to look at that and be able to modify as disruptions happen.
What we haven't done, actually, I should have maybe asked this early on, but try and put the scale of your supply chain operation. Can you give us some stats or numbers?
So we sell about 10 billion tubes of toothpaste a year.
Just 10 billion, yeah?
Just 10 billion.
Yeah.
We manufacture in 45 countries, sell in over 200, have over 200 distribution centers. It's 20,000 of the 36,000 employees of the company are in the supply chain. It's a pretty big operation.
Pretty big, yeah. That's one way of describing it. Okay, let's look ahead a little bit as well. Future challenges. I mean, we've said, disruption is probably here to stay, and I know we can't predict, black swans or whatever you want to call them, but what future challenges do you anticipate being on the horizon for supply chain? Yeah,
I think efficiency and productivity are still very important, but how to get that is going to be different. It's looking at process, managing process differently, using the technology and the tools that are available with automation, and then how do I connect it all end to end and holistically manage it for that level of reliability, efficiency, and consistency. So I think that's much more orchestrators are what we're going to need within, and people that connect the dots over multiple processes are where we're going.
And what's kept you at Colgate-Palmolive for 40 years?
I am someone who gets bored easily, and if I get bored, I need to do something different. And I could say that they've always kept me challenged. I think I've had about 18 different jobs in 40 years, and each one, more challenging. Learned a lot. I like to solve problems, puzzles. I think that's the new kind of job description for the chief supply chain officer, is the chief problem solver. But there's never been a lack of challenging opportunities at Colgate. I also think, my dad worked for the same company for 44 years. It was kind of the whole thing about loyalty. You provide your work for the company and they provide for you was important for me. And so here I am.
Okay, let's talk about, workforce and labor. There's, a lot of shortages around at the moment, skills gaps. It's difficult to attract talent. Why do you think nowadays, if you think it's the case, that it's hard to recruit people into the supply chain function. And how do you actually address that? How do you make supply chain attractive?
Yeah, I think it's different by country, by location. It's very local in terms of where you're able to attract talent. We're now, again, getting very deep into local technical schools or schools wherever they are to get people exposed early to what it is to work in manufacturing and in logistics. I think there's a bit of people aren't really sure what that means, so they're not necessarily attracted to it. You have to start early to educate, to get people to want to come into it.
And what kind of people are they? What kind of people are attracted to supply chain? I mean, you mentioned problem solvers earlier.
Yeah,
is that the right mindset?
You know, I think we made some mistakes in the past of you have to have a college degree to do this, or you have to have a 2-year technical degree to do that. People have to be teachable and want to learn, right? And if you have those kind of people in your facilities, you're going to get better if you provide that learning and that teaching to people.
Good answer. Now, this is something I mentioned yesterday, actually. You know, supply chain is very much in the zeitgeist at the moment and dominating, news headlines. And most people have probably never heard of supply chain. Even 2-3 years ago, right? It was maybe there'd be a shortage of something for one day, but no one was really that familiar with the phrase supply chain. But now it's everywhere. And people are aware of the role that it plays in their daily lives. So how do you navigate that shifting dynamic, if you like, and try to mitigate people's misconceptions of supply chain?
I think there's a lot of misconceptions. I mean, everything's getting blamed on the supply chain. If something doesn't work, it's the supply chain. Well, no, not really. It's because someone didn't do something in your organization to get the product or service here when I want it. So you really have to kind of understand, what is the problem you're at. Not every delay is a supply chain delay, but that's what the world thinks today. And not every out of stock is because of a supply chain delay. It could be because somebody made a mistake, but those happened before this all happened. But now it's just this whole, anything that goes wrong is blamed on the supply chain. So I think we need a bit of a PR movement to what we do and what we don't do.
That is quite interesting, I suppose, because as soon as you have that spotlight, people can sort of hide behind it. Do you think a lot of organizations are saying, oh yeah, well, it's the supply chain, because it's something that's happened maybe thousands of miles away that's beyond their control, and they can just say, oh, well, it's the supply chain?
Well, I did think for a while there was an easy way to explain things and say, that's a supply chain problem, and everybody says, oh yeah, everybody has supply chain problems. That's going to go away because supply chains are becoming more resilient. They are becoming more back to being stable, consistent. And so that as an excuse, I think is going to go away.
Okay, I'm keen to have some questions from the floor if there are any. Yes, lady down here. Could we get the microphone down here, please? Just bear with us. And what are your future plans, Mike, while we're waiting for the microphone to come over here? Because obviously, you're, like I say, you're not going anywhere. This isn't a retirement ceremony.
Well, actually, I am retiring at the end of this year, and so but I'm not going anywhere in terms of. I would still like to be involved somewhat.
What kind of way, like consultancy role?
Advisors. I think not so much a consultant, more kind of an advisory role. I think that's something I could still give back. Also work, say, for a nonprofit. I'm, pretty passionate about the sustainability and how supply chain can help with that. So.
Okay, right, really, really interesting. Yeah, if you just start saying your name and where you're from, please.
Hi, I'm Birgit Weilemöhr from Titan Swan. And as I usually work with sustainability leadership and executive legacies and corporate legacies, then I would have a question. Is there something that you have been trying to, let's say, to manage as your personal legacy?
No, I have an opinion that legacy is kind of an ego trip sometimes with people. So I'm not a big fan of legacy. If you asked me what my legacy would be, it's the people I'm leaving behind that are going to take over and make the supply chain even better than it has been. That I think is what your job is as a leader, to make sure that you develop people that can take this operation and move it forward. But I'm not a big fan of legacy as a statement.
Did that answer your question? Any more questions from here? Okay, I'm just going to check the app here. 1 second. Our virtual audience. I think my battery is failing fast here. Okay, so one more question actually from me. What's the best piece of advice that you've received in supply chain? And is that still relevant as a piece of advice that you would pass on?
Yeah, I think so. The piece of advice I got early on was to work in all parts of the supply, work in as many parts and understand the business that we're in deeply. And I could see it today where some people are so focused on a function, they really don't know what the business objective is. What are we doing? What are we selling? Who are we selling it to and why? That would be a mistake, especially trying to run a large global supply chain. You really have to understand all aspects of the business and all aspects of the supply chain too. So getting involved, getting into as many different functions as you can and learning, I think is really critical.
And I think I'm right in saying that you've also worked around the world as well.
Yes.
And that's important, right? Because you need to know the cultural differences and the way of doing business, and obviously the impact that supply chain has globally on a huge organization like Colgate-Palmolive.
Yeah, it was a tremendous learning experience living outside your home country, learning a new culture. It was a tremendous experience for my family too. You kind of forget that it's not just about you, right? So they became more global by understanding that. So I think that's in a company that's truly global, that operates in many parts of the world, it's a learning you don't want to miss. You really do need to understand that and get that experience on the ground.
Now, some people have said that, globalization, with the problems that we've had with supply chain, the world could be shrinking back and turning away from globalization. I mean, what's your take on that? Do you think we still need that global outlook, or do we need to be doing that, nearshoring, reshoring?
I think you have to define globalization. A lot of times what people were talking about is I sourced all my products from China and now I have a problem because I have one global source. We never did that, and we don't intend to do that. Our facilities we produce about 95% of what we sell. And our facilities are located, 60% of what we produce is sold in the country it's produced in. So we're global in that we have operations globally, but they're in large demand area where we sell a lot of that product. So, and then we see how far we could stretch the delivery of that product to other countries. So, yeah, if your globalization is betting on one thing, I think you got a problem. That's not going to work too well, and that has to be adjusted.
Okay, well, look, I don't have any more questions, unless there's any more final questions here from the floor. Yeah, could you get a microphone to the back there, please? And again, if you can just please state your name and where you're from, please.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Karan from Ping Summarize. We do Salesforce projects for companies. But yeah, thank you for the speech. It was really motivating to know about you and your journey so far. So just going to the last question you had around like more focus on supply chain these days. So are companies able to secure more budget for your department then, is it? Because there is more focus everywhere in media into improve supply chains?
I didn't. Sorry, I couldn't hear that properly. Could you say it again, please?
Yeah, so I'm just saying, so with the more focus on supply chain in media and everywhere, so are companies able to secure more budget in terms of spending for your department, because there's more focus now on supply chain?
Yeah, I don't think it was a budgeting issue before or now. You have to make sure that you're getting resourced right, funded right for what you're trying to do. Things have changed that are going to require some more cost than it had in the past, but we haven't had any issue with presenting that and getting those things funded. But I'm sure that will be a concern of many companies as they start to look at their supply chain, and it might cost a little more than it did at one time.
Yeah, I suppose with supply chain having a more prominence, in public perception, but also in the boardroom as well. I mean, do you find from your point of view that you have a bigger voice now?
I think I was lucky in that I worked for a company that respected that, and we've always had a pretty good voice. I think I got a lot more questions in the last few years than I did prior, but we were always involved. We were always, part of the decisions. So, but I could see that happening more. You read about it more, that all of a sudden now supply chains have a seat at the table, people say, but we've had that, so that's not something that has changed.
So that's not something that you always, hoped you would get. It's something you feel that you already had.
No, I mean, and your voice has to be balanced too. There are other factors going on, right? So again, if you understand the business that you're in, and then you understand the part of your business you're in, you should have, that fair share of weight in your voice.
Are there any supply chain professionals here in this audience, or procurement professionals? Do you think that you've got more say now than you did 3 years ago? Just for the benefit of our virtual audience, no hands have been raised. I don't know what that says. But interesting. Look, been really fascinating to speak to you, Mike. Thank you so much. Mike, everybody.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you so much. Thank you.